Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well and staying safe and warm and hopefully enjoying the snowfall from the comfort of your own homes. It's really good to see you all. Tonight, we are joined by the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Who we have with us tonight is Jeff Scalakin, who is Deputy Director, Angie Martinez, the Senior Right-of-Way Manager, Eric Setzler, our Chief Engineer, and Mike Malik, who is our Senior Project Manager. So they have a really great presentation to share with us today. As usual, we're just going to hold questions until the end of the presentation. And then, you know, we can do the raised hands thing. I will call on you, and we can direct your question to the correct presenter. And just a quick note on questions, kind of like we did last week for the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. Just to remember, if you have a very specific concern that might have to do with your property or a permit or some kind of personal issue that you're having related to the department, you can please feel free to reach out to me and try to get some of that solved. I work with everyone who is here tonight from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure regularly, so we can definitely work to solve that issue. And our DOMI presenters were interested in learning a little bit more about you. We don't have to go through introductions again, but I will say that this is a class, a cohort of about 35 Civic Leadership Academy participants. They were chosen from over 100 applications to the Civic Leadership Academy. This cohort was supposed to start in, I think the date was like March 16th or something of 2020, and we had to cancel their cohort, and we finally kind of got looped around and were able to start virtually. So they've been waiting to participate in the Civic Leadership Academy for many months. I think we have about 22 neighborhoods represented from all 9 council districts. Everybody lives in the city of Pittsburgh, and a lot of people here are also involved in very interesting work around the city from a variety of backgrounds. So it always makes for really interesting discussion, and I know everyone is eager to hear from DOMI and to learn. So I will kick it over to Jeff. I think you're starting off.
Yep.
Thanks for being here.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jeff Scalakin. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We're going to go through the agenda real quick. I'll go over the department overview and the budget. We have Angie Martinez, who's our Senior Right-of-Way Manager. She's going to go over the planning, policy, and permits. That's going to be followed by a 5-minute break. And we have Eric Setzler, who is the city's Chief Engineer. He's going to do a quick overview of the construction division. And we have Mike Malik, who's the Senior Project Engineer in our traffic division. He's going to go over the traffic department for 2021. What's the word mobility? It's in our title, but the way we define it is ability to move freely and easily. It's ability to move between different levels in society or employment. What's the mission of the department? The mission is to provide the physical mobility necessary to support the social and economic mobility of the people of Pittsburgh through the management, design, improvement, and operation of the public right-of-way. We have 5 goals in the department. The first one is no one dies or is seriously injured traveling on city streets. Our second goal is every household in Pittsburgh can access fresh fruits and vegetables without the requirement of a private vehicle. The third goal is all trips less than 1 mile are easily and enjoyable, achieved by non-vehicle travel. The fourth goal is streets and intersections can be safely navigated by adolescents. And our fifth goal for achievement is a combined cost of transportation, housing, and energy does not exceed 45% of household income for any income group. The department is broken down into 3 bureaus. We have the Planning, Policy, and Permit Bureau. They work on everything for planning, transportation planning, policy, and permits. We have the project design and delivery. They work on structures, the streets, the construction and paving in the city. And we have the traffic division. They work on traffic design, signs and markings, and traffic control, and also traffic permits. The infrastructure. The city has over 1,000 miles of streets. We have 68 miles of bike infrastructure, and we have a total of 611 traffic signals. We have 150 city-owned bridges. We have 500 retaining walls, and we have over 800 sets of city steps. The 2021 capital budget, this is still in draft format. I think you guys already had a presentation with OMB. The total capital budget for the city right now is almost 125 million. You can see the big chunk of the capital budget is for DOMI, for the engineering and construction, and we're almost at $68 million. The 2021 engineering construction breakdown for DOMI, the major projects that we have, the major dollar amount projects we have, are the TIP projects, and these projects are Transportation Improvement Program, and these are projects that we receive federal and state grants for. These are your big projects in the city, like your Charles Anderson Bridge, your Greenfield Bridge, big dollar amount projects like that. The second biggest expenditure for DOMI is street resurfacing. That's at 17 million. That includes your paving, et cetera, like that. The budget, if you have any more questions about the budget, it can be found at the links provided. And I'm going to turn this over to Angie. Angie Martinez is the Senior Right-of-Way Manager, and she's actually the acting Assistant Director for Planning. And she'll be going over the planning policy and permits for the city.
Great. Well, thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. So maybe just a little bit of background from me. Prior to coming to the city of Pittsburgh, I worked in municipal planning and in traffic or transportation in the Northern Virginia and Maryland area. About 4 years ago, decided to make the move from the Northeast back home, closer to where I'm from in Ohio. I have family roots in Pittsburgh, and what started originally with the city in the Department of City Planning. And then once DOMI was created, moved over from city planning into DOMI, and then over the course of my 3.5 years with the department, moved from the planning and policy group into the permits and inspections division. So as Jeff said, I'm the Senior Right-of-Way Manager, which means I oversee our permit and inspection group. And right now I am the acting assistant director, as our current assistant director, Kim Lucas, is on maternity leave. So I'm really happy to be with you guys tonight, presenting on sort of a culmination of all sorts of positions and sort of professional journey with the city so far. So if I were to try to sum up the mission of the 20 or so people that work in our bureau, I would say that we are responsible for taking community input, research, data, best practices from the industry, as well as real world site constraints, and building that into plans, design guidelines, advisory documents, in order to help better direct investment and management strategies over the public right-of-way. This all with the goal of trying to achieve a safer, more equitable, and efficient use of public space. That is really DOMI's roles and responsibilities, is in overseeing the management of our public rights of way, our bridges, our streets, and the assets that fall within them. On this slide, I tried to present just a bit of a collage of how I see that in the city of Pittsburgh. So to me, this means everything from building community and data analysis into our planning recommendations. It's developing guidelines and policies for everything around the design and the location of things like curb cuts, to operating licenses for new mobility services, such as Scoobies or e-bikes or other sort of technologies and mobility services that might be coming our way to manage. That means, understanding like service areas, checking for insurance compliances, just trying to keep pace with the management of emerging technologies and not having to be so reactive. Some other things that our Bureau is responsible for is overseeing the management of 2 city contracts. The first is our city bus shelter contract. So all bus stops and transit routes are managed by the Port Authority of Allegheny County. That's the regional transit provider. However, the city is actually responsible for owning and maintaining the transit shelters. We also are responsible for managing and maintaining city streetlights. The majority of those are the big Cobra headlights that you see mounted on Duquesne light wooden poles. And then we also have a number of city streetlights that are the more decorative metal pole with the decorative bulb at the top. What that looks like is being able to respond to emergency and maintenance requests when we have issues with a street light that's out or a bus shelter that's been damaged, but then also making decisions about where to install new shelters, new street lights when they are requested by members of the public, 311, community groups, council districts, and being able to evaluate those decisions, understanding that we're working with limited resources and a limited budget. So that's a high-level overview of the breadth of the work of our Bureau. Maybe it's because it's the end of the year and it's been just quite a year for everyone. I thought that for the purpose of this presentation, I would just touch on some of the things that our group has done in 2020 and then give you a little bit of a sense of some of the things that we'll be working on in 2021. So obviously something that nobody could have foreseen at any capacity or any level was the COVID-19 emergency. This impacted operations in the city at many levels. Where we felt this almost immediately was in the request for from the retail and restaurant industry to use the public space, so sidewalks, parking lanes, in some cases travel lanes, in order to provide seating areas so that people can dine safely without having to be inside. And so DOMI, in collaboration with the mayor's office, public safety, PLI, city planning, a whole our nighttime economy manager and representation from business groups worked to develop in very short order, a mechanism to be able to intake and evaluate requests for outdoor seating in public space. So we evaluated over 100 locations. We were able to issue permits for outdoor seating at 50 of them. The 2 that are provided on this slide are Oakland Avenue in Oakland and Shiloh Street in Mount Washington. Another initiative that we worked on in response to this was is in developing short-term loading zones for pickup and delivery, primarily for restaurant to go. So far, we have only issued 8 of those short-term parking zones. However, as expected, we are seeing an increase in those because of the change in weather and then also additional restrictions that we're seeing coming, to keep everyone safe and reduce indoor dining and potential exposure and transfer of the COVID-19 virus. As a part of these initiatives, we also developed a winterization guidelines. So we knew early on in the summer that, this was looking like something that we were going to be in for, in the long haul. And so we worked to develop some protocol for how some of these outdoor dining spaces could be converted with tents and heaters and other things so that operations of those services could continue through the winter months. We are also in the process of evaluating the effectiveness of these strategies. So DOMI and our partners, the mayor's office, the other departments we collaborated with, we really did this to try to be in support of industries and local businesses that we knew, might be hurting. We want to know if some of these initiatives were helpful in being able to sustain these businesses throughout this very challenging time. So we're working to survey and ask questions of the people we issued permits for to see if they found this process to be a success. But it was a major lift, totally unexpected, and I think really speaks to the value of staff and the city to be able to sort of move quickly and on our feet when challenged by something like this. Another project that we launched in 2020 that was not unexpected, it was very much planned, was our first Safe Routes to School program. So Safe Routes to School is a national initiative. You guys may be aware of it from, work in other locations or living in other places. The mission of Safe Routes to School is to increase the number of students biking and walking to school through education, encouragement, outreach to students and parents and school administrators, as well as addressing some of the physical issues that might, issues in the physical environment that might cause safety or other barriers for students to be able to walk or bike. So as of 2020, the city now has a Safe Routes to School coordinator. She's funded through a PennDOT grant. And as a part of her position, she is also managing a budget also from the state as a part of this grant for $250,000, which will be used to invest in some of those physical improvements, most likely things like traffic calming near schools, signals, speed humps, signage, sidewalk restoration, or not sidewalks, crosswalk restoration, sort of solutions that are identified as potential barriers. I'm happy to say that the 2020, the first year of the program was really not all that disrupted by COVID, although, students are, primarily, being schooled from home. We were able to do a lot of work with our 4 schools, one in Hazelwood, Arlington, Homewood, and Northside, sort of teeing up the existing conditions, talking to school administrators, doing our walkability audits to identify issues, all in advance of, students not having to be, in school for us to be able to do that and for that sort of data collection. I am hopeful that, this program, as it runs into 2021 and 2022, that we'll actually have some of those physical improvements, those safety improvements installed at such a time that it's safe for students to return back to, to their schools for schooling. So we're really excited and proud about this program, and you'll definitely see more from it. 2020 was also a big year for us because we published our Bike Plus master plan. It has been over 20 years since the city of Pittsburgh had updated our bike plan, and obviously a lot has changed in 20 years. The city has changed, where people live and work and how they want to get around, how we think about safety and environmental concerns, and vehicle traffic congestion has changed. Additionally, I would say the transportation industry has also evolved and are thinking about, bicycle facility design. So I think most people, when they think about, bicycle infrastructure, they're thinking about cycle tracks, the Penn Avenue, painted green cycle track, 2 ways, bollards. That's not the end all be all. There's a lot of other strategies. So the 2 photos that are provided here, the first is the Southside Neighborhood Way. This was a connection that was created in the South Side within the existing cartway. So not a huge capital project lift, using pavement markings to better designate, the roadway and multiple users, the cyclist, the drivers, the cars. And then you can see in the corner there some signage to provide some wayfinding to cyclists so that they can find the best and most appropriate route to get through the South Side. The photo on the bottom of the screen is an example of a pilot project that we did for a small traffic circle out in Highland Park. This was deployed, using, more temporary materials, pavement markings. You see the landscaping that is there is in pots, with the idea that, if this is a successful intervention, if it calms traffic, if it continues to move the buses and the vehicles and cyclists more safely and as efficiently as the existing four-way stop, that this can be converted into something that's a little bit more hardscape and permanent in nature. So as a part of implementing the Bike Plus Master Plan, all of these strategies we've sort of put together under the umbrella of Move Forward Pittsburgh. And what that is a plan to see through the implementation of the master plan. We are working in partnership with an organization called People for Bikes, who have provided some pretty substantial financial backing in order for us to, really focus on the community awareness and participation of the changes to the roadway that might happen as we build out our bicycle network. We're also working with Bike Pittsburgh, Healthy Ride, and others. Up in the right-hand corner, you'll see some of the designs that have been done to promote Move Forward. I would say that, getting back to, how the industry has sort of evolved over the past 20 years and more recently, something that sort of recognizes that one of the places where it can be challenging or difficult to advance bicycle infrastructure is in the community, either feeling as though they were not aware, they were not consulted, they didn't understand the alternatives or the constraints that drove the decisions to install or not install bicycle facilities in certain areas. So the Move Forward campaign is really meant to increase transparency in this process and to provide to residents, access to information and ability to weigh in on these types of projects. So in 2020, we installed 13 miles of bicycle infrastructure, and then we have a goal, which is ambitious, of installing 50 additional miles over the course of this project. That sounds ambitious, and I'm sure it's raising questions for you as Pittsburgh residents. And so we provided to you some additional resources in this presentation where you can take a look at the Bike Master Plan, get an understanding of the importance of filling in these gaps in our existing network, the safety and environmental and other benefits that come along with that, as well as a link to our Move Forward PGH website, which if you have not already been engaged in any of those projects, I highly encourage you to check out. A lot of effort, thoughtful work has been put into how to make these projects accessible to residents in a way that folks feel like they have meaningful participation and understanding of potential changes that may happen in their neighborhoods, in their communities. And you will hear much more about Move Forward PGH throughout the next several years as we continue to build out and push forward implementation of the Bike Master Plan. One of my last slides here is sort of my bread and butter in the area of public space permits. So DOMI is responsible for reviewing, issuing, and inspecting over 20 different types of permits for work or occupancy in the public right of way. So that is everything from sidewalk cafes to excavation permits for utilities to dig up the road and service their lines. It's construction permits to block sidewalks, to build buildings or restore facades. It's curb cut permits for residential uses. It's anything happening in the public space more likely than not requires a permit from our Office of Permits and Inspections. In 2020, our big news was that we went from having a public-facing, purely paper application permitting process to moving over to one-stop PGH. which is the city's online permitting platform. This was a major effort and transition for us because we did it all during the COVID emergency. So that meant staff had to really adapt very quickly to new technology, working from home, and we didn't miss a beat. We didn't have one day of downtime. In addition to that large change of moving our business online, we also went through the process of updating our business practices. We took a look at the permit types that we were issuing. We took a look at the fees. We revised our permits. We revised fees where appropriate, in order to better streamline the permitting process. Also, as a part of this effort, we completely overhauled our permit website. We created what we're calling permit one-pagers, which are meant to be resources to applicants so that they understand I'm requesting to build a curb cut. This means I need a permit. This is what it's going to cost me. This is what DOMI will review in my application, the documents I need to submit, the best time for me to submit when I want my permit on such day. So we really took a lot of care to try to put all of this information into one place to make things as easy as possible for applicants. So if you're looking to get a permit in the public space, I highly encourage you to check out our new website and all of the information that's available there. One of what I think is a success of our Permits and Inspections Bureau for 2020 is that we reduced the overall number of permits that were issued, but we increased our fee capture. So in 2020, we issued 13,000 permits, but we captured more than $2 million in additional permit fees. And the reason for that is because we restructured our permits in such a way that we eliminated some redundancies. So people were getting 2 permits when really they could just perform work under 1. So that explains the drop in permits. It was not a drop in business. It was a drop in the way permits were issued. And then in terms of fees, that capture went up because there was an adjustment to certain fee types. And then also the biggie was working with PWSA, who is now paying the city permit fees for their excavation and construction permits. So the last slide I want to sort of leave you with is where we'll be going in 2021. So our Bureau will be concluding and presenting recommendations from 2 planning efforts. The first being the Pittsburgh 2070 plan, which is a long range sort of mobility vision for Pittsburgh, as well as the Strip District Parking and Mobility Plan recommendations, which we expect to release in the spring. We'll be kicking off 2 additional planning efforts in 2021, the first being in the Hill District and the second in Oakland. These will be done in collaboration with efforts of Department of City Planning in the Oakland area where they're doing a specific plan, and then also as DCP's comprehensive land use plan process kicks out, which I'm sure you guys will hear a bunch about when you have your meeting with DCP. Some of the other things that you'll start to see from us are mobility hubs. So we expect that in the spring of 2021, Spin, which is an electric scooter operator, will be operating in the city of Pittsburgh. We have been working with Spin for the better part of a year, trying to site locations for these hubs where electric scooters can be stored and where members of the public can gain access to all sorts of mobility services in the area. So we're really excited about this project moving forward. In 2021, we're also going to be beginning a very large project, which is the conversion of our city streetlights to LED bulbs. So year 1 is going to be procurement and planning. The benefit of this conversion is going to be energy and cost savings to the city. And so it may not be in 2021, but certainly in 2022 and beyond, you will start to see the rollout and conversion of streetlights into a higher efficiency, higher performing bulb. And so a lot of work to be done there. You will more sooner than that, and actually right now, we are also improving our transit shelters. So the city was actually without a maintenance contract for our transit shelters for over a year. As of October, we have a contractor on board. They're working to get all of our shelters into a state of good repair, painting them, repairing glass, making sure that power is wired correctly, to make sure that that network of transit shelters is as best as it can be. And then once that is in order, we'll also start deploying transit shelters in new locations. The last thing I just want to quickly touch upon is something that I think is glossed over a lot, but has major implications to the work of our department, and that is the policy implications that are made at the state level. So the state legislature has made certain recommendations or passed certain bills around things from small cells to autonomous vehicles to something which is called a personal delivery device, that all impact the way municipalities can regulate these types of services in the public right of way and in the public space. So we have two policy analysts that are very much keeping their eye on what is happening at the state level and thinking through some of the policy implications that our department and our city will have to deal with as a result. And so this is all an effort to be more proactive as opposed to being reactive when we're talking about these types of changes that, or types of decisions that might be made at the state level but impact city residents. So that's what I have for you guys. Leah, I believe we're going to go ahead and take a break.
Yep. We can do a 5-minute break. So I'll see you all back here at, let's just say 6:43. Okay, I think we can bring it back. Mike Malik, it looks like you are up.
Awesome. Thank you, Leah.
Thanks.
So I am a project manager with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure Traffic Bureau. And to put that simply, we oversee the design, maintenance, and construction of traffic control devices within the city of Pittsburgh limits. And so chiefly you're looking at signing and pavement markings, physical signs, roadway signs, traffic signs, as well as traffic signals. And to split up our group, it's probably easiest to call us, on one side you have an operations group, and on the other side you have a design group. And so beginning with our operations group, you have the laborers, the foremen, the signing and pavement marking specialists, the electricians who physically go out into the field and perform maintenance work on our city of Pittsburgh owned infrastructure. As a municipality, we are responsible for maintaining our signing and pavement markings and our traffic signals in good condition. And so we have to have staff available who are qualified and adept at maintaining our infrastructure. They are based in the Strip District at 2625 Liberty Avenue, where we have a warehouse that's split in two. You have signs on one side, you have traffic signal electricians on the other. And they're an impressive group of people who maintain a significant amount of infrastructure. To give you a general idea of how much infrastructure we're talking about, this is a screenshot from Cartograph, which is the city's asset management system. And this is just kind of a rough overview of the pavement markings and signage that we maintain. To break this down a little closer, we also have, this is the image of traffic signals. The city currently owns 611 traffic signals, which I would say for a city with a population base of 300,000 people or so is a large number. Philadelphia, for reference, has 3,000 signals. New York is about 10,000. So we're much lower compared to them in terms of our infrastructure responsibilities, but still a pretty significant number for what I would consider to be a small to mid-sized city. 5,000 crosswalks that we, and depending on what material they're made out of, we either repaint them every year, every 3 years, or if it's a road that's going to be worked on via City of Pittsburgh paving program. We painted after the paving season. And then I'm actually, this number, I want to double check that because 40,000 signs seems small to me based on the scope of our work. Yeah, so like these men and women in our traffic shop are required to maintain documentation of what kind of sign is supposed to be in the field. They are supposed to know where it goes in relation to features in the roadway. They maintain a very large file of work orders. And then as we receive notice that these signs need to be replaced, they go out and complete that work. Every day is different for at least the people in our traffic control shop. They have to respond to emergencies on a regular basis. And as you can see here, these are two relatively recent ones. We have now the Port Authority bus fell into the sinkhole and they mobilized a crane. And as it turns out, we were mobilized to try and take down the traffic signal mast arm that we tried to take down to accommodate lifting the bus out of the hole. And we couldn't get the arm down, so they actually had to lift the bus over our traffic signal mast arm. We responded, we were there. The picture on your right is, from a traffic signal maintenance standpoint, the most debilitating, hard to repair emergency, which is a traffic signal controller cabinet. Someone at the mouth of the Armstrong tunnels wiped out our controller. And so what this looks like is probably a minimum of a 2-day repair with 2 crews. One crew working on building out the cabinet and testing in our shop, and then the second crew is out here physically performing the work. You know, during this time, we don't have signal functionality or operations, and so we will post stop signs, and then that signal is going to be stop controlled for ideally as short amount of time as possible. In this case, I want to say it was down for about 2 days. We also deal with pole knockdowns. To your left, this is 62nd Street in Butler. Our infrastructure is old. It's a significant challenge for us, and it's something we're trying to keep up with. We're trying to replace our signal infrastructure. We don't have the ability or the funding to replace it as fast as we'd like, so we have scenarios like the picture on the left where we are using an old embedded trolley pole as part of our signal, and then the pole at the base began rotting, and slowly, I don't know how long this happened, but basically the span wire connecting the 2 poles started drooping because the pole was being pulled out of the sidewalk. So in this another case where this signal was down for probably about 2 to 3 days. To your right, we had a very devastating knockdown in terms of a vehicle losing control coming on the off ramp from the Parkway onto Liberty Avenue at Commonwealth Place downtown, and they wiped out 2 street lights and 2 traffic signal poles. This is a much more difficult repair for us because the foundations were unable to be reused. So we had to mobilize a contractor. We don't do foundation work. We only do work above the ground. So we had to mobilize a contractor to come out, pour new foundations, set new poles, and then rewire the traffic signal. And so I guess that's a hard part of our job and an exciting part. You never know what you're going to deal with. Your day can be completely thrown off schedule based on the occurrence of these emergencies. And then the way we receive, one of the primary ways we receive feedback and the need to go out and complete this maintenance work is through the city's Q Alert 311 system. We receive approximately 100 requests per week, 50 of which are purely operational. The sign was knocked down, please set it up. This sign is missing. Someone stole a stop sign. Like, those are just basically go out, replace what's there. We also then receive 50 work orders that are requesting changes to a traffic control device, which at that point requires an engineer to go out, evaluate the field conditions, then make recommendations based on whether or not the sign needs to be moved, needs to be removed, relocated, so on and so forth. Operating alongside our operations group, we have the design group, which is engineers and technicians who handle more of the design side of our projects. We do have the ability to oversee construction. And so it's a diverse task list that we end up working on. capital projects, we can, once we receive notice that we have funding, we can, from start to finish, we can handle design and then construction management of projects. A lot of cases we will look to outside consultants to provide design. Something that I didn't really appreciate how much time it would take until I started working here was, as City of Pittsburgh's municipality, we are responsible to own and maintain traffic control devices. And so outside agencies, they are able to come in and complete this work, be it PennDOT, Port Authority, private developers will complete work within the city of limits, but ultimately any of these decisions that are made with regards to traffic control, they have to basically make it through our department before they can be approved and then permitted to go to construction in the city right away. And so our group will also perform that design review, trying to look out for the best interests of the city. And there are currently 3 projects. Really, I should have made separate slides for some of these, but we've gotten heavily involved with PennDOT's East Carson Street project, which is a traffic signal and also a safety project on East Carson Street from Smithfield Street Bridge to 33rd, I believe. And then the past probably 2 to 3 months, we have been heavily involved with the BRT final design review. And so even though that's a Port Authority project, the city of Pittsburgh, fulfilling our role as owners of the infrastructure, everything that goes in that project, we are going to be handed over. That's going to come to us at the completion of the project. And so this has been a significant cross-department exercise with Eric Setzler's group also being involved. And then a project that probably is I'm most passionate about, I would say, is the ATC MTD Smart Spines project, which is a federally funded $28 million traffic signal project to bring smart traffic signals to 8 corridors in the city of Pittsburgh. This project is getting ready to kick off into preliminary engineering, but this is going to end up being probably the most substantial investment in traffic signal infrastructure in the city within probably 20 to 30 years. And so that's where I'm spending most of my time right now, and what 2021 will, and going into 2022 will be most heavily involved with, is the Smart Spines project. 2020 was not as productive of a year as we would have liked. We lost 2 months of construction season due to COVID. So it was hard. Shutting down construction was hard. At the time it made sense and it was the right thing to do, but we definitely lost time. We were able to we got a fair amount of work done. Actually, I'm very proud of the amount of work we got done considering limitations. And so I'll just briefly go over a few projects. Angie earlier mentioned Move Forward, and one of the projects that resulted from Move Forward was the Marshall Avenue project to install both a bicycle climbing lane on Marshall Avenue, as well as bring in some traffic calming aspects, such as painted curb bump outs, where we try and gore out and paint the areas near crosswalks to prohibit vehicles from parking there, to improve sight lines for pedestrians, and so that way a car isn't blocking, which should be ideally an unobstructed sight line from the eyes of a motorist to the eyes of a pedestrian crossing the road. This is purely a pavement marking job, and so you're hopeful that it is going to have a decent amount of traffic calming impacts. We took before and after data to try and compare and see how much an improvement we made. Going like 2% of the current motor vehicle population dropped in terms of who is speeding on this road. That doesn't sound like a huge number, and it's not. It'd be nicer to have a greater impact, but considering that's just purely a paint job, it is nice to see pavement markings having that type of role. And especially since it's first and foremost was a bike lane project, and so being able to implement traffic calming techniques along with that project kind of made it a 2-for-1, which was nice for us. In terms of more robust traffic calming, we do have to use speed humps. And so in the past probably 2 years, we've been pursuing them as an intervention on city streets that have certain criteria that make them strong candidates for speed humps. This is Mission Street in the South Side slopes, excuse me. And you can tell the difference that speed humps make in terms of reducing speeding amongst motor vehicles and reducing their what's called the 85th percentile speed, which is like a traffic calming term, basically indicating that the top 15% of motorists are driving too fast. We're not going to, consider their speeds, and that we're going for an 85th percentile speed that meets the characteristics of the roadway. The drop in this was pretty incredible in terms of a 77% reduction in vehicle speeding along the roadway, and then having the 85th percentile speed drop from 30 to 21 miles an hour. This is substantial changes that we finally collected our post-construction data in the past couple of weeks. Very excited to see this. This is outstanding news for our bureau. This is a big win for us. On another side of things, we are constantly trying to upgrade our traffic signal inventory. 611 traffic signals. If I had to estimate, probably about 200 of them are at least 60 years old. And so it's hard to overcome that number through either outside projects by PennDOT, primarily PennDOT actually. They redo a lot of work in the city, as well as the capital budget. We are trying to replace, if we can, at least 4 signals a year, 5 signals a year. This year we were able to complete 4 projects: Liberty, Millvale, and Bloomfield, 40th and Penn, between Bloomfield and Lawrenceville, and then Shady and Wilkins, Shady, Northumberland, and Squirrel Hill. We have 4 more coming soon, which are either under construction now or on the verge of being under construction, and the goal will be to complete them during 2021. Traffic signal replacements, as they stand today, will meet our current standards, and so there'll be new poles painted in that gloss black, new signal heads, which are going to be larger in LED bulbs, and they also have the back plates and the reflective tape, with the idea being to provide a contrast between the traffic signal LED indications as well as the environment around them, so that way they're easier to see for motor vehicles. New traffic signals in the city will include countdown pedestrian timers, and so that way when it changes from the walking person indication that you are able to enter the crosswalk to the flashing don't walk, the signal phase again changes, and it counts down the amount of time until the signal phase changes, as well as audible pedestrian push buttons that provide audible cues for visually impaired users. This is a great project to finally complete. This has been around for long before I was here, and this is the Downtown Bike Facilities Project to provide a connection from Greater Allegheny Passage to the Point State Park. And so we have bicycle track connecting along, think here from Penn to Stanwix. Then we also have the cycle track along Stanwix that provides connectivity to the 3rd Avenue contraflow bike lane. There's also some new infrastructure here that we have not done before in terms of having the bike lane come up to sidewalk grade and then having it go through the bus bump out. In certain cases, we're limited by the space we have, and there was simply no great way to get this bike lane around some of the high usage bus stops that are downtown. So this project is actually, there are a few more things to clean up with this project, but it's probably 95% done at this point, and we had our ribbon cutting in November. This is very exciting for us to complete this project. And that's all I have. I really appreciate you all listening. I'm very excited to hear your questions. And I'm going to turn it over to our chief engineer, Eric Setzler.
All right. Thanks, Mike. My internet's been being a little sketchy on me, so I hope that I come through and you're all able to hear me okay. As Mike said, my name's Eric Setzler. My role in DOMI is the chief engineer. I oversee the Project Design Delivery Bureau. So that's one of the 3 bureaus you've heard from Angie and Mike, and leading the other 2 bureaus. So we are tasked with delivering a lot of the big capital projects. Now, Mike just got done talking to you about some of our capital projects that traffic actually takes the lead on it. Traffic takes the lead if it's primarily a project that has to do with traffic control devices, such as the signals and pavement markings and things. A lot of other of the bigger infrastructure projects are coming from my bureau. We have 4 divisions, just as we're kind of set up: the streets division, the structures division, construction and paving divisions. And I'll talk a little more about them as we move through the slides here. Go ahead, Mike. All right, so streets. So, as you know, DOMI is basically responsible for the right-of-way. And the major component in most of our right-of-way, of course, is the street. So that's one of our big functions. Routine maintenance is handled by the Department of Public Works, which is like street sweeping, emptying trash cans, plowing snow, some of the more day-to-day operations. But bigger picture items, ongoing repair, upgrades, things like that, fall to DOMI. In addition to just streets, there's the sidewalks, which include ADA ramps to give you access down to the street and back up. Of course, curbs, crosswalks, all that to make a complete walking path, a walking environment. And also some trails, use trails that might be for bicycles or pedestrians. So, streets, we have, there's probably 4 main kinds of streets. We have streets that are asphalt, streets that are concrete, blockstone, also called Belgian block, and brick. Obviously, brick and blockstone streets are 2 of the more historic materials. And a lot of streets that are asphalt actually have the brick or the blockstone underneath, which you might see sometimes if the asphalt's worn away, or if the street's been open for some kind of utility work or something like that. You might see the old blockstone down there. We do an asphalt paving program every year, which I'll talk about later. This picture here is an example of doing some repairs to a concrete street. This is, if I'm correct, this is Broadway Avenue down in Beachview. We have a project going on. This was one component of the project, was to replace concrete slabs in certain areas that were deteriorated and had a lot of cracks and potholes and old patches and things like that. So we've been working on a project that it didn't have the funding to fully replace everything, but we were able to get out and identify some of the worst areas and get those replaced. Mike, can I go to the next slide? This is still Broadway here. So, I showed you the concrete slab repairs on the previous page. That was kind of phase 1 of this project. For those who are familiar with this corridor, you see the trolley tracks going down the middle of the road, which is also where the vehicles travel. However, historically, you can see the bus stop is there, the blue bus stop sign, and the area behind that was open. And so when a trolley was stopped at the station or at the stop there, cars could go around it, and on the right, we called it a slip lane. That's great for if you're in a car. That's great for getting to your destination a couple seconds faster, so that you don't have to wait for the trolley when it stopped. But it's not great if you are a transit rider and you're trying to get onto or off of the T, and then you might have these cars buzzing around behind you. So if you're from this area, or if you travel, through this area, you'll know that last year or earlier, we went through and we closed these slip lanes. And first we did it just using flexible bollards that are bolted down to the pavement, kind of on a trial basis to kind of give a proof of concept that this could work and it will improve safety. After that, we went through in collaboration with the Department of City Planning, and this fall, DOMI installed permanent bollards. These permanent bollards are steel pipes embedded in the ground filled with concrete. So those are much more durable. So this was done. We did make some adjustments based on, putting up the temporary bollards and watch traffic move and interact. We did adjust a couple things to try to optimize it as best we could. And then after we installed those, Department of City Planning did a public art project where they invited several artists to come and actually install art directly on the street and on the bollards. So this is a view of that. I believe that wrapped up in September, and I think that was a really successful project and really provided a great visual improvement to this corridor. We are currently in design for the last phase of this project, which is realigning the intersection of Broadway and Beachview Avenues. And we're going to bring Beachview in more at a T and create some plaza space where that intersection currently is at. So we're just getting going on design, and we'll be working towards construction for the last phase of that project. We have a lot of different street work going on, but that was one project that I wanted to highlight that we've been working on the last couple of years here, and it does illustrate a variety of different things that we get involved in. So, in addition to doing projects, delivering projects, if you will, our streets division is also responsible for maintaining construction standards and procedures. This is a drawing. This example drawing is just showing a standard drawing for concrete sidewalk. You obviously can't read it at this scale, but it shows the top is a plan view looking down, and it shows some dimensions, how wide it should be, where these joints in the sidewalk are, and then in the middle there's like some section views. So if you kind of cut the sidewalk apart, you can see that the blue hatched area is gravel, which has to be below the concrete, and then it shows how thick the concrete is, and it shows the standard for where the reinforcing steel mesh is placed in the concrete to ensure the durability of that concrete. So, as I said, our bureau and specifically the streets division is responsible for maintaining these standards, and they serve a purpose they have multiple purposes. I mean, we use these standards for our own project. So if we are doing a project and we need to replace the street or we need to fix a sidewalk, these are the standards that we provide to our contractors and say, this is how you do it. If PennDOT is going through doing a project within the city, we also request that they use our standards if it's a street that's ultimately the city owns the street or the curb or the sidewalk. We also enforce these standards for people who are working in the right of way. The biggest would be utilities. As many of you know, I'm sure there are all kinds of utilities under our streets, water, sewer, gas, electric, sometimes communication, all kinds of things are buried in the street. So inevitably, the utility need to open our street, cut open the street in order to access their utilities. And they have to follow these standards with their street to make sure that we're, getting a good durable street when their project is over, and that we don't end up being left with an ongoing, maintenance issue that is going to crumble in a couple of years and the utility is long gone and then we're stuck with it. So that's why, one of many reasons that we have standards like this. Angie spoke to you earlier, and her division, the permitting division, would be giving permits to those companies that are working in the right of way, and then they would be enforcing, the permit inspectors would be enforcing, inspecting that work and making sure that these standards are followed. The other big time would be developers. If you are building a new, an apartment building or a commercial building or whatever, and you're affecting the street as part of your project, then of course we would be asking you to restore it to these standards as well. On the next slide here, I have one of our other standards. This is the right-of-way procedures manual. We are issuing a new version. It should be coming out this month. The date highlighted there is tentative. our streets project manager, Mike, has been diligently getting this put together. He's not going to wake up on Christmas and publish it, but I think he put that in there as a placeholder, thinking it a little bit of a Christmas present to ourselves, that we are able to get out some new, update the procedures manual so that we, can ensure that all those people working within the right of way are going to be doing the right thing and making sure that the city gets a good, that our facilities are well maintained and are going to be in good condition. And this is available on DOMI's website. So if you are, for whatever reason, need to do something in the right of way, you can go and look it up. Another part of the streets division, this is development review. This kind of cuts across multiple groups. City planning and PLI, permits, licenses, and inspections. Those departments are involved in development projects, and DOMI's involved to the extent that a project affects the right of way, which could be the street, the curb, or the sidewalk. So our streets engineers are tasked with reviewing their to ensure, once again, that standards are being followed. That if you want to have a driveway to get into a garage or a parking lot, that you're following appropriate standards. It can't come out right at an intersection because it's unsafe. You have to have a certain distance back. So there's all kinds of things that we would look at. Tree pits. We like trees, but we want to make sure that tree pits are installed correctly, so that they're safe for pedestrians and that they're going to have successful trees. We work in conjunction with the Department of Public Works Forestry Division on that. So there's a lot, and there's been a lot of development happening in the city the last couple of years. So this is always a source of it's always something going on that we have to keep up with and keep these things moving. Touching on another one of our big projects, this is Smithfield Street reconstruction. So this is a project that is just getting started. It's just kicking off design, but it is a total reconstruction project. This is a project that has federal funding, which comes to us through PennDOT. So they're picking up 80% of the tab, and we have to contribute 20%. This project is on Smithfield between Forbes and 6th. So it's a 3-block section, which is going to be completely redone. The street, including the base and the sub base, right on down to the ground, all new curbs, all new sidewalks, really giving the whole thing a fresh look, and just really upgrading all the infrastructure, everything you see and everything that you might not see as well. This street has a lot of components that it's not a huge street. The street's not terribly wide, but there's a lot to fit in there. So it'll be an interesting challenge to make sure that we are apportioning this limited right of way to the best uses and to accommodate all the different uses as best we can. This particular picture is just showing a bus only lane, which heads south towards the Mon River. It's actually a bus and bike lane, so bikes are allowed to use it in addition to buses, but not regular vehicles. Next slide. In one block in the corridor, there is a valet parking lane for the Embassy Suites. So this, is something that, just based on the layout of the street, we needed to make this accommodation for the hotel so that they could get people in and out. But it's one more thing that we need to try to accommodate within our street. So, that can be a challenge to make all that work. And then, here is something that is not necessarily visible to the average person walking down the street, but is constantly a challenge for us. Many of our older buildings were built with the basement extending out all the way to the curb line. So underneath the sidewalk is actually the basement of the adjacent building. Those basements are in the right of way, so they're an encroachment, which was acceptable when it was constructed, and that can still be done with the proper permit if necessary. But as we want to replace the sidewalk is actually the roof of a vault. So it's a pretty complicated process. Some of these are in active use and they're kept up. So we would just replace the roof, replace the sidewalk, and move on. There are other buildings where the vault is not in active use and it may be very deteriorated. So it may actually be better to basically fill the vault in, basically build a new basement wall, underneath the front wall of the building, and then backfill that so it becomes a regular sidewalk on the ground. But every building's different, and the only way to figure it out is to get in there and talk to the property owners and get down and see the basement and see what it looks like, and make decisions on a case-by-case basis from there. So those are some of the challenges that go into some of these larger projects. There really is a lot to think about. Moving over to our structures division. So the structures division is, they're responsible for structures. I guess, as it might sound obvious, but what is a structure? So bridges are the big one. We have, I think we said earlier, about 150 bridges in the city that the city is responsible for. There are also bridges that either PennDOT or Allegheny County are responsible for, but we have about 150 of our own. We have a lot of retaining walls. We have a lot of city steps. It's not totally unique to Pittsburgh, but it is, we have a very large collection of steps, which I think we're all pretty proud of, but they also suffer from a lot of deferred maintenance. A landslide is not really a structure, but it does fall under the structures division. We've had a lot of landslides last couple years due to steep slopes, due to underlying soil conditions, and due to some of the heavy rains that we've got. We've got a lot of rain in the last couple years. Sometimes the result of a landslide is that we need to build a wall in order to fix it. This picture here is an example. This is Newton Street in the south side, kind of on the edge between South Side and I guess Arlington. It's right off of Arlington Avenue. There was a pretty big slide in, I believe it was 2018, and we ended up constructing this wall. This wall is constructed with steel I-beams that are drilled and placed in the ground and embedded in concrete, and then those are precast concrete panels which are placed between the steel beams to create a wall there. Here's an example project and a bit of a case study. The Charles Anderson Bridge is, you may not know it by that name, but it is the bridge that carries the Boulevard of the Allies from Oakland over Junction Hollow going into Shenley Park. This is kind of a striking view looking north towards Oakland. It was constructed in 1938, last rehabbed in 1987. Which is, over 30 years ago at this point. Total bridge length is, about 760 feet long, and it's a truss bridge. Actually, it's a Weichert truss, which is a relatively rare form of truss. So it does have some historical characteristics to it. Go to the next slide. So, as the bridge is old, it does have some deterioration. This is a picture underneath the bridge, which came out of a bridge inspection, showing some of the deteriorated paint and some of the surface rusting that has occurred. We are responsible to inspect our bridges. It's mandated by the federal government. Routine inspection has to happen a minimum of once every 24 months or every 2 years. For some bridges that have some more critical members, they might be required to be inspected more frequently. The Charles Anderson Bridge is inspected every year at this point because it's a truss and because it does have some deterioration. It has a weight limit on it, which is less than the full legal loads. Because of some of this deterioration. So it's on a 12-month inspection cycle. So every year we're looking at it. Occasionally there could be a special condition where we would actually look at a bridge more often than that, even down to every 6 months perhaps. So we are currently working on a project, a major project, which is one that's getting state and federal funding to rehab or replace this bridge. We're still in the study phase on that. It's early on. However, before we get there, this last summer we had to do some repair work, some heavy maintenance essentially. There was some cracking in the deck that had been noted, and the bridge inspectors determined that it was a high priority repair. They didn't feel like it could wait. It had to be addressed within 6 months or a year of being discovered. So we went out and we did a partial replacement of a section of deck in this past year. Let me go to the next slide. As I mentioned, though, we are looking at a major project, which the design effort is underway. So we are studying to determine if it will be a major rehabilitation of the bridge, which would involve replacing the concrete deck and doing extensive repairs on the steel truss, fixing anything that is deteriorated, replacing rusted components with new components, and then completely repainting the entire bridge. Or there is also a possibility that it would go to a replacement structure where we would build an entirely new bridge. Part of that, since this bridge, as I mentioned, it is a Weichert truss and it is considered historic. So we need to look at if it's feasible to rehab the bridge and meet our need. If we can rehab it, then we will rehab it. And as I said, we are in that process of determining it right now. Part of that in determining if it can be rehabbed is determining what we need the bridge to carry. Currently, it is 42 feet wide for the travelway, and that carries 4 lanes of traffic, which is, a little on the narrow side for 4 lanes. It has two sidewalks, which are really only about 5 feet clear by the time you take into account the fence and railing. So that's, a bit narrow both for pedestrians and for vehicles, and it doesn't have any good place for bikes. So we are looking at various options. Some of these were just some nice sketches that were proposed. These don't necessarily correspond to anything that we are going to do. We haven't come to those determinations yet, but it shows that there are various options that you have to look at with vehicle lanes, with shoulders, with sidewalks. Bike facilities is important to us. So we're working on determining the best path forward for that. The design effort will probably take probably at least another 2 years there, and then we'll be able to kick off construction after that. I wanted to drop in another project here. This is the West Ohio Street Bridge, which is under construction right now. I don't have the best pictures, unfortunately, but for anyone who is familiar with Allegheny Commons on the north side, this bridge carries Ridge Avenue coming from Allegheny Circle and heading to the west. It's a through truss bridge, so you can see the truss above the deck. The sidewalks were closed a while back, and then half the bridge was closed, and then more recently the entire bridge was closed to vehicles where pedestrians and bikes could still use it. The design effort on this project had been going on in various phases for almost 20 years. There were a lot of complications. If you've been in the city for a long time, you may have been somewhat aware of it. There was a lot of discussion back and forth with the railroad. Ultimately, we're having to raise the bridge some to provide some additional clearance for trains underneath. But anyway, the project is happening, so it's very nice. After a bridge is so deteriorated that it has to be closed, it's really exciting to see all that work of 20 years come to fruition. And the picture kind of on the left here is showing new steel beams being placed. This was just this fall when that picture was taken. That project is going to continue through next year, and the new bridge will be opening by the end of 2021. I also want to talk about paving, the paving division. It's funny. I like this picture because it's a great street. It's a blockstone street. Although I'm talking about paving, and I have a street that doesn't have asphalt on it. But what are you gonna do? So the city owns, almost 1,200 lane miles of streets. So a lane, if a street is 2 lanes wide, then each lane will be counted as we're making those, as we're counting all that up. Little over 1,000 lane miles. So the vast majority are asphalt streets. The surface is asphalt. 13.6 million square yards is the total area of asphalt. We also have about 76 lane miles of concrete streets, and then 36 of brick and 16 of blockstone. So of course that picture there is blockstone. In the past, a lot of times if a brick or blockstone street was deteriorated, we would just pave over it with asphalt and basically convert it into an asphalt street. These last couple of years, we are taking a different approach to that and attempting to maintain and keep these brick and blockstone streets where they exist. They are a more historic material, and once you pave over it, you're really, it's very unlikely you're going to go back to brick or blockstone. But many of them, even if they are deteriorated, they just need some spot repairs to get them back into acceptable shape. We do some repairs on concrete, brick, and blockstone streets each year, but the big effort is on asphalt paving, since that's where most of our stock is at. So how do we figure out what to pave? Of course, that's a big question of many people. Hey, you're going to pave my street. We have more paving needs than we can do each year. So we do try to prioritize. We look at a lot of different things. One thing we do from a data standpoint is we look at, we have an overall condition index, or OCI, assigned to every street. This is a numerical score between 0 and 100, and it's based on inspection. And this printout here is from our GIS system Cartograph, and all the streets are in there, and every segment of the street from one block to the next has a OCI assigned to it, based on those observations. Our average is about 50, and for primary streets, which are the more major streets, the average is a little higher, 62, which is probably good. You want to keep your busier streets in as good a condition as you can. The secondary streets are right around 50, and the tertiary streets, which are your small ones, your alleys, streets with very low volume, typically narrow streets, unfortunately, they're not quite as good a shape. Their average OCI is 36. So the street selection process, it actually starting right now for next year. So our 2020 paving season is done, but we're gearing up for 2021. Our paving division goes through and they get into Cartograph and they pull the data and they look at condition and they pull out the bad streets and they start there. Of course, there's usually more than you can get to, but we start there. We do get a lot of community input. There's 2 main ways that happens. One is through paving requests that are put into the 311 system. So we collect those over the course of a year, and then currently our paving division is assessing all the 311s that were received over the past year and collating them and then working that into their evaluation matrix. We also solicit input from each of the city council people. Of course, they know their districts best and also usually have direct communication with their residents, so they will provide input. We also reach out to the utility companies for 2 reasons. One, no one likes to pave a street and then have a utility come by 3 months later and cut it up to fix a line. We really want to avoid that. So we tell them what we are planning to do, and if they need to do something, they can get in first. Or if they have a project next year and we say, hey, we're going to pave this street this year, they say, oh, we have a project next year. Then we say, okay, well, we'll hold off. We're not going to pave this year if you have to dig the street up next year. So you can do it next year. And then the paving can be completed perhaps as part of their project, or we can get it after they're done. Either way, we're really trying to improve our coordination these last couple of years to, prevent those situations, which just, they're not a good use of resources to pave a street and then dig it up. So there will always be emergencies. It will never be perfect, but we are really trying to improve our coordination efforts in that respect. Here's just an example spreadsheet. This is actually from last year, I believe, but just showing just some of the data we collect on streets that we are going to be paving, from where to where, and then we keep track of when it's done, how it's being paid for, costs, things like that. The 2020 paving program, which we just wrapped up, this year we were able to pave approximately 345 streets. Our asphalt paving budget was just shy of $11 million, and we got almost 40 miles of streets done, 40 street miles, which works out to, 79 or 80 lane miles, with the typical street having 2 lanes. And that wraps up my overview of the planning policy or the project design and delivery division. And at that point, you've heard from all of us in Domi. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Leah.
Thanks, everyone. Let me see if I can find my clap reaction. We like to give claps on Zoom after every presentation. There we go. Thanks, everyone. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that great presentation. I think we can launch into questions now. I actually don't think I see any questions in the chat, although Bill did leave an interesting tidbit about cobblestone streets. So can't confirm that, but that's very interesting. All right. Let's see here. Larry, you're up first.
Thanks, Leah. 2 questions that I think are pretty easy. You spoke of somewhere in the vicinity of 600 signals in the city, and you included a slide which was Liberty and South Millvale, in which I believe 15 individual lights were visible, and there are probably a couple more. I'm guessing that that intersection counts as 1 signal to the city, otherwise the numbers don't make sense. Can you confirm that or?
Yeah, confirmed. Yep. Every intersection, I think of a signal as a controller. And so like the stainless steel box, that's 1 intersection. So yep, you're correct.
Thank you. Second, you spoke about brick and blockstone streets, and the ones that were illustrated are tiny little streets that are probably somewhat remote and low traffic. Grant is different. And roughly 2 years ago, when I first came to town, Grant was being redone. And I have always wondered why it's brick and why it was being replaced with brick, even though the newly redone sections began to move and rattle and shake within months. It seems like an extremely high maintenance solution for a very heavily traveled street. What's the reason that it's not paved?
Yeah, so Grant Street was not always brick. Maybe back in the olden days it was, but it was asphalt, and there actually was a concerted effort, a project to make it a brick street. I believe it was I'm thinking the late 80s approximately. Approximately in the 80s. I think the theory was that Grant Street is, it's kind of like the front door of the city. It's where the city county building is, the county courthouse, the federal building, all those things. So it was a like a public design beautification, anchoring the downtown kind of thought that went into that to create that as a brick street. I think it is an asset. Obviously, there is some maintenance that's required for that, and it does get beat up pretty good. As you know, there's a lot of buses, a lot of trucks on there, so it does have a pretty good concrete base underneath it. But yeah, last year we tackled that one section up by the federal courthouse. There are additional sections, and kind of my hope is that we can do little sections here and there, and kind of over time, replace it over time, piece by piece, instead of tackling it as one project, because it would be extremely expensive that way. So we haven't gotten back and done another section yet, but that is something that I would like to be able to do. But it's definitely, it's an increased investment, and that decision is made primarily based on the prominence of the street.
What's the projected life of a newly redone brick section, and how does that compare to a newly paved concrete or asphalt street?
I don't have exact numbers on brick on that street. It is at least 30 years old. And you know, there are sections that do require some full replacement. There are other sections that are still in pretty good shape. You know, we have some brick and blockstone streets that have been around for 100+ years, and some of them are still in pretty decent shape. But those are, as you say, you know, Grant Street's in a little bit of a different classification from the other ones. You know, for a street that is asphalt on a major route like that, we would be probably looking at paving it at least every 7 years. So it is less, you know, significantly less for other materials as opposed to asphalt, but you know, the investment is bigger also when you do have to do the work there.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Let's see. Will?
Hi, I just want to thank you first for like a really interesting presentation. My main question was, you know, Pittsburgh has like some wildly different seasons weather-wise. And I was just wondering if the seasons like impact like our roads and sidewalks. Like we have pretty cold winters and pretty hot, wet summers. So I was wondering if that, how that interacted with like having to maintain the roads and sidewalks.
I'd be willing to jump in on that one again. So, I mean, you know, yes, it affects us. I mean, the first thing is that anyone in the northern climates has construction season. You know, I think the joke is that we have construction season and then we have winter, but, you know, I've been down to Florida and they do construction all year long because it's, you know, never snowing. So that affects how we plan and approach project delivery. We have to think about getting things ready so that in April you can kick off and start building things. Can you get it done by October, or does it have to be a 2 construction season project? So that affects us on the planning side and how we approach projects. You know, a lot of like our street materials, your asphalt, your concrete, things like that. I mean, they don't have any concerns with warm weather. They don't really care about cold weather either, except for salt. Salt is an issue. It can deteriorate concrete and steel. So, you know, certainly the more salt that you have to apply to the roads and the bridges, that ultimately will have some effect on the life of them. But, you know, that's just, it kind of, it is what it is. You know, here we are and it does snow. It's snowing right now. Water, you know, I did mention like the landslides. I mean, rain and water is always a challenge. You know, living in the hills, we have, you know, we have steep slopes and we have, you know, narrow valleys. So we get flooding, we get landslides, you know, all that. Water is always a challenge for maintaining our infrastructure and keeping everything operational and keeping it safe.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Allie.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I think this question is relevant to the department, but you'll tell me if it isn't. You know, a lot of studies about motorists yielding to pedestrians in marked, you know, crosswalks where pedestrians should be yielded to, and because they're not routine, you know, they're not all over, it requires, you know, some real attention and care by motorists, but motorists should be doing that. So I wonder if there's any sort of education or, you know, public campaign on the part of the city to impress upon, you know, drivers how to treat these. Studies have also shown that implicit bias plays a role in how motorists properly yield and, you know, pause at these marked intersections too.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's definitely applicable to our department. I mean, those are the kinds of issues that we think about, I'd say every day. Back at the beginning, Jeff had mentioned some of the goals of our department, and our first goal was that no one dies or is seriously injured on our streets. And we are trying to look at strategies through traffic calming, through the Safe Routes to School program, through upgrade to traffic signals to include better pedestrian signals and things like that. We're constantly looking at ways to improve safety. And one of the major things is, pedestrians and bicyclists, obviously they don't have a car protecting them, so they are more vulnerable just by definition because they are not in a vehicle. It's there will always be an error, I guess. There just is. There are accidents. There are distracted drivers. There are distracted pedestrians. So part of it is what can we do from an engineering standpoint to design the street in such a way to at least protect people some and reduce the chances of things happening. I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's looking at their phone and they drive through a red light, there's only, we can't necessarily fix that. But if there's other things that we can do to make pedestrians more visible, or other strategies, at least we're reducing the likelihood of some of those things happening as much as we can.
Yeah, I agree with that, Eric. That's like the people on this phone call are mostly going to be talking about design interventions or design standards that we utilize. We'll lean on our partners in terms of education and outreach in a lot of ways. We have, I'm not sure the status of this, but we have what's it called? A program to encourage safe driving. Oh, Angie, what's it called?
Safe driving pledge.
Thank you. Yes. I blanked out on that. So we do have that. That's an in-house initiative through Bike Pittsburgh and through Healthy Ride. We will also, if we have new designs or something that we want to educate the public about and try and get that out there, we will look to them to lean on them for their graphic design, for their outreach, and some skills that they have to help us for that as well.
I think it's to be expected that I think all three of us representing the department have something to say about crosswalks and pedestrian safety, because going back to the mission of the department and the goals that we have, pedestrians are one of the most vulnerable users on our public rights of way. And so and Eric or Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, I think I have this right. All intersections are legal crossings, even if there isn't a crosswalk painted, and vehicles are required to yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. How you address the behavior is a combination of design interventions, pavement markings, better lightings, things like that. Education, such as the Safe Driving Pledge. I think things like Move Forward and just raising the overall visibility of the importance of these safety strategies at, getting us to a safer, more equitable, more connected city, as well as on some level, some enforcement. So, public safety ultimately enforces, the traffic code. And if that's not, it's more of a gray area than I think any of us would like it to be. And so, I think really relying on the design and the education strategies more than the enforcement is the direction and the sort of tools that DOMI has to be able to address that type of concern.
Thanks, everyone. Looks like Matt has a question.
I guess I have like a multiple part question. how does climate change and sustainability factor into like Domi's mission? And in terms of paving, is there any reason why we are still using just asphalt? It seems like every year we can't pave enough fast enough, and we are grinding the streets up as fast as we're putting them down. And we have like piles of old asphalt in our parks and along the rivers and like sort of everywhere. And I guess it seems like there has to be a better solution at some point in the future. Is that something that the department is looking into?
You want to go first, Angie?
Yeah, I want you to address the second part of that question, though.
All right.
I can take, so from a broad sense, how are we addressing the issue of climate change? This administration is obviously very on the forefront talking about climate goals. Transportation and specifically vehicle emissions are one of the greatest producers of greenhouse gases. And I think it's one of the sectors of greenhouse gases that, you know, as a municipality, we have some of the most control over, because we can create better, more connected transportation networks that facilitate and encourage modes of transportation that don't produce those same level of greenhouse gases. So when we're talking about, you know, benefits of you know, transit or, you know, bicycle facilities, when we're talking about, you know, even things like increasing the quality and the design of bicycle parking and buildings, so that, you know, it's more comfortable for people to be able to place their bike when they're commuting to work. Those are the types of strategies that we're looking towards. Some of the things that we've talked about as a department is better aligning what we would call a mode share goal. So that would be looking at all of the trips that happen in a part of the city or in the city as a whole, and saying what percentage of those trips are happening by vehicle, what percentage is happening by transit or walking or biking, and then what are some of the solutions that we can explore to try to increase those multimodal trips. And there's a variety of ways we have tried to factor that into development review and other projects that the city is doing. The last project I will mention is the city streetlight conversion, which again is the upgrade of our between 35 to 40,000 city streetlights to a higher performing, energy efficient LED bulb, which will, you know, supply chain address some of the climate change and sort of environmental considerations for lighting public right of way. And then Eric, I think the question was about recycled materials.
Sure. So street materials, I mean, that is a good question. There are definitely advantages to asphalt. It is quick to mill up and put down, and compared to some other things, it is lesser in initial cost. So we can get a lot of paving done. There are challenges. You know, one of them is that a number of our asphalt streets, as I mentioned before, actually have brick or blockstone under them. Some of them have, you know, trolley tracks are still down there. Don't get too technical here, but I mean, asphalt is considered a flexible pavement. So it's not like concrete. It will, you know, bend and conform to whatever's underneath it as you continually drive over it. So if the sub base is all rutted up and you know, cracked or whatever, that's going to have a negative impact on how long the surface asphalt is going to last. Concrete streets last way longer. You could easily get 40 or 50 years out of a concrete street with only minimal maintenance. But the installation cost is way higher. You know, it's a lot more expensive to put in a concrete street. You know, the good thing is once you have those, then you can leave them for quite a while. Although on the flip side, you know, as a downside, we do have some neighborhoods. I know Stanton Heights is one. You know, there's some neighborhoods in the South Hills too that were built with concrete streets, and some of those are getting to be in pretty bad condition. So there's a higher maintenance cost when it does get to that point. If you haven't kept up with sealing the joints and things like that over the years, that can put you in a little bit of a bad position. So honestly, from a budget standpoint, we're not really in a position to convert asphalt streets to concrete. Just the cost is too high. However, we are definitely trying to keep the concrete, brick, and blockstone streets that we have. That asset is already there. We don't have to go and install a new brick street, which would be extremely expensive. But if we can do repairs and keep the one that we have, that's going to be, usually better from a cost perspective and long term. Instead of, the quick fix would be pave it over. It looks great for a couple of years, but then you're going back again and repaving it in not too long. So, definitely we are constrained by one, the material that we have and what we've been given to deal with and the budget that we have. But, certainly looking to at least keep the other material streets that we have as they do have longer lifespans.
All right. Thanks, Eric and Angie. Kelsey?
Hi, everyone. Thanks. So I have a question about the Safe Routes to School program. So I'm active with our neighborhood bike and pedestrian group, Better Streets Lawrenceville, and we've been working on traffic calming efforts for a while. And in a few streets in particular, one has been 40th Street, and we've been very happy and grateful for all the work that Domi's been doing on 40th Street with the new lights at 40th and Penn. And now we just found out that we're getting a lit pedestrian signal across 40th Street. It's too bad the other interventions didn't work, and that had to be the most serious intervention to finally get people to slow down, but really happy to hear about that. And so now we're also organizing people along 39th Street to submit the traffic calming application, but I understand that there's a long line. A lot of streets are very interested in getting traffic calming. That street also has a school on it, and so I was wondering if we should just submit a traffic calming application when that happens, or if there's another application process or another just process for the Safe Routes to School program.
So the Safe Routes to School program is starting off as a sort of 2-year effort. We're working with the 4 identified schools to develop the program and then to implement solutions at those locations. The goal is that at the end of 2022, that program gets transitioned from a state-funded program to a city program. And at that point, I think there would be an opportunity to open up, and I don't know how this would look right now, but then to open it up to either new round of champion schools or other types of Safe Routes to Schools projects. Mike can speak to the traffic calming process and, how that is, how those requests are sort of evaluated as they come in. And you're on mute, Mike, if you're.
It happens at least once every Zoom call I'm on. Kelsey, the best short-term intervention is to go through a traffic calming program. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, we're getting close to triple digits right now in terms of the applications we've received, and we're trying to amend our program to make it a little more nimble. But it's right now that we have 80 more locations to go through where we're going to place traffic counters, collect basic speed data, traffic volumes, percent of vehicles speeding. For us to accommodate you, it's going to be a while. I am familiar with 39th Street. I'm also familiar with the 40th and Davidson Beacon. Given the amount of investment that's already happening on one side of Arsenal, my guess is it'll be hard to justify spending that investment on the other side of Arsenal without taking a look and reflecting and making sure we're not spending too much effort in central Lawrenceville. And we're going to probably have to distribute that traffic calming funding elsewhere. With that being said, definitely submit an application. I just ask for patience because it'll be a while for us to get to it.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think when we had our last meeting, kind of explained that there's a long list, but probably worthwhile to get on the list. And I know there are other streets as well that are in Lawrenceville planning on submitting. So this will be in line. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Hey, Mike, do you mind just explaining a little bit for those on the call who may not be familiar with the traffic calming program and kind of that request application process?
Absolutely. So the demand for traffic calming far exceeds the supply based in terms of available resources for staff and like available resources for construction. So we set up an application process where neighbors who are interested in pursuing calming for their street can complete a petition with a certain percentage of their neighbors. Once that petition is completed, we receive the application, we review it. And then if it is deemed to be the street where traffic calming interventions would make sense, we will go ahead and collect pre-project data. That pre-project data actually could, in and of its own, be a way to determine whether or not that project will receive construction. Because there's certain streets you need either like they have too low volume, too high volume, the grade of the street. And so based on that data, we'll make a determination in terms of which locations are most in need of calming. And then from there, we'll go ahead and reach out to the community and begin the project process for that. It is on our website, and we are in the process of trying to change how we go about selecting our projects and how we go about receiving applications. So this 2021 probably won't be a change, but we're working on the process.
Thanks, Mike. Larry.
By now, I feel obliged to ask every department or railroad question. I have been looking at a number of underpass and overpass conditions, and until today, I never thought about grade level crossings. What happens when the railroad's right of way and your right of way intersect? Who sets the standards for construction there? Who does the work, and who's responsible if there are problems?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would say it takes a lot of coordination. So there are a lot of intricacies. Working with the railroad is, quite frankly, is a challenge. It tends to be a long process. Typically, if it's an at-grade crossing, the railroad owns, well, obviously they own the tracks, but generally they own the crossing itself. The area right in between the tracks and immediately adjacent to the tracks. If there are gates or flashing lights or those kinds of things, I believe generally the railroad owns those as well. So as a city, if it's our street, we could pave up to it on both sides, but we couldn't improve the crossing itself of our own volition. We would have to, discuss with the railroad and come to, work out some kind of agreement if they were going to do it, or, if there was a situation where we were trying to advocate for that work. They ultimately have the ownership of the actual crossing itself, and those crossings are governed by the PUC, the Public Utility Commission of the state. So the PUC can order a crossing to be maintained. They can order a crossing to be upgraded. They could order a crossing to be eliminated if that were brought up in some way. So lots of coordination there.
So if a pedestrian or a cyclist or a motorist has a problem on the pavement but within the right of way, do they have to call the PUC instead of 311?
That is an excellent question, and I'm not sure if I can answer it. I don't know, like how an average citizen would, if they would have success at the PUC. I mean, I think that they can. You could probably reach out to both, to be quite honest. I mean, if it's our street, we ought to know about it as well. But you know, the PUC ultimately has jurisdiction over the railroad.
Thank you.
Thanks. Kelsey, you have another question?
Yeah, I had a question about the overall condition index and whether those scores are publicly available and whether you apply those scores to trails.
I do not believe that the scores are publicly available to the best of my knowledge. Those are contained within our internal GIS system. There are some parts, some layers of that system are publicly accessible through the website. I don't believe that the OCI is. And as far as trails go, no, I don't think at this point, I don't think that we've applied an OCI to the trails, although if Mike or Angie, if you know, if I'm wrong.
We have
correct
not.
me. Okay, Jeff knows.
Okay. I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. Are we feeling like we've said everything we had to say? Wow. Oh, Jacob.
Sorry, I have to be that guy, I guess. I'm just
No,
wondering.
no problem.
I'm just wondering, and if this was already mentioned, I apologize. I was listening on the phone and on my way here. Beside the point, can someone explain to me the history, maybe quickly, of the decline of where we are now with the trolley lines and streetcars? I realize that they're like really expensive to put in, but I also I think I have some understanding that we had a lot of them at one point in our history, and I'm just curious, like, who made the decision to think it is a good idea to just pave them over? Probably a gradual thing. And then also, two-part question would be, looking to the future, what do you think is the best mode of transportation intercity? So not necessarily thinking regionally, but just like, would it be a bus or a gondola or bicycle? I don't know. So thanks.
I'd be willing to dive into that. I don't claim to be an expert or the official word on this, but I mean, you know, I guess my understanding in kind of the demise of trolleys, it's really a national story. You know, it goes back to the, you know, probably the 60s and it's the automobile era, and you know, the dreams of the country and everyone owning an automobile. And I think there were actually policy decisions made which, you know, kind of shifted focus to automobiles and away from trolleys, rail, things like that. And that hit us just like it hit many other cities throughout the country. You know, and once people start driving, you know, if ridership drops, then, you know, financially it becomes tougher to operate those. I mean, I think historically most of those, the trolley and bus service in the city was operated by companies, privately operated, and then as things started to collapse, you know, some of the remaining operations were folded into the Port Authority of Allegheny County, and they took over, you know, kind of what was left, and now they maintain it. You know, it takes investment to operate a system like that. You know, I mean, that can be a topic of conversation sometimes, like, you know, should transit be subsidized? But I mean, the fact is that driving in vehicles is subsidized a lot through building roads and you know, many other kinds of decisions. So the answer is yes, transportation is subsidized by the government. We have a role in that. So I mean, that, you know, kind of going around in the big picture, I suppose. But you know, those trolley companies folded a number of years ago, and then once those are gone, then the lines aren't being maintained, and then over time they get cut up and paved over, and that's kind of where we're at now.
So to that, yeah, I see that we've already ran over, but I can't hear a question like that and not chime in a little bit. In addition to all of those other forces, I think, you know, something that Pittsburgh experienced, many other cities did as well, was a population decline and a loss of population outside of the city center, which obviously has implications for housing, transportation, jobs, the distribution of economic wealth, and many other things that come along with it. However, all that said, and I am not a Pittsburgh historian. There are people who can speak to this much more eloquently than I can, but I'll give you my sort of armchair perspective of it, is that because Pittsburgh is a city that did come to prominence as a city where people, there are these amazing, commercial centers, people who walked to work, like really, residential neighborhoods with like a ton of character, a fantastic downtown. And because we came to rise, the heyday of Pittsburgh was not the heyday of the automobile. We have preserved, I think, or have the opportunity to go back to those really quality things. We can go back to a city where walking is, a great way to get around, where, trolleys or service, additional transit service can be, part of the solution. And to that end, I would say that the 2070 mobility plan looked at, although it's projecting out 50 years, a lot of those types of solutions were calling back to the trolleys, the gondolas, the things that we had that we've lost over time, because there was a reason why they were there. There's a reason why they went away, but then there's also good sense for why they might come back as the city changes. Also, the city Department of Community Planning will be kicking off their comprehensive land use plan. No spoiler alerts, because you guys will hear from DCP, but like the type of land use, strategies and mobility strategies that come along with like a long range transportation planning effort, I think are also going to call back to some of the sort of things that we've lost over time.
Don't forget the second part of the question. My heart says bike, my head says bus. I think buses are the cheapest, most impactful, most flexible form of public transit, mass transit, and that is where I think our investments need to be. But I really love my bike, and so that's my answer.
Thank you, Andy and Mike. Let's see, Allie.
Yeah, so this is a niche question here for the north side, but if the topic is one you'd like to expound on for other areas, please do. I'm curious about the potential for the Davis Avenue Bridge that would connect Brighton Heights with Riverview Park. It's a way to really increase park access and put a major park in reach of people who, like, the alternative of public transportation is, it's tedious to use public transportation to the park, and really not an easy walk without that bridge. So I know that was a feasibility study paid for, and that's great progress, but where might it stand? And are there other, is there the potential for other pedestrian bridges that would really dramatically change access to other city assets?
So yeah, I can talk about that. So I have good news about that. It's not 100%, but we do have funding. We are starting design for a replacement bridge for the Davis Avenue Bridge. It will be a pedestrian and bicycle bridge, not a vehicular bridge. Design will be kicking off this winter. That is funded. Now, construction is not fully funded yet, but we would expect the design effort to take, probably in the range of 18 months. And while we are doing that, we will be looking, applying for grants and things like that. Our hope would certainly be that by the time that we can get design done, we can identify funding for construction, and then we could roll right into to bid it out and get it going. But at a minimum, we are going to complete the design so that we can, have that in our pocket and then go after, construction funding, be that grant sources or whatever, and hopefully within a couple of years be prepared to kind of resurrect that crossing that existed and has been gone for a while.
Thanks. Okay. Let's see here. All right. Are we done with questions? Looks like it. Okay. Nice. Actually, we came in under time tonight, which is rare. So thank you to Angie, Eric, Jeff, and Mike for a really thoughtful presentation. I'm not sure if we mentioned this at the beginning, but DOMI is the newest department in the city of Pittsburgh, and in a very short period of time have done a lot of really important and thoughtful work for the city of Pittsburgh and all of the residents here. So we thank them for that. And also for this presentation. I'm going to give a few more claps just for answering those questions candidly and thoughtfully. I see some more coming up here too. And so for Civic Leadership Academy participants, I just wanted to let everybody know that we are actually, or remind everybody that we're actually not meeting again until 2021. So we do have the next 2 weeks off. So I hope that everybody stays safe, has good holidays, however you're celebrating. And I also wanted to do a quick plug for an Office of Community Affairs program called Snow Angels, which I don't think I've mentioned before. If you haven't heard of it, my office matches volunteers who live within a 10-minute walk of people who may need a little bit of extra help shoveling their snow during the winter. It is also semi-relevant, I believe, to DOMI because it does help keep the sidewalks clear. That is within the city of Pittsburgh's code. It is important for pedestrians to get around, for our postal carriers, really for anyone who needs to continue to use the sidewalk. So if you think that you may be able to volunteer a little bit of time during snow events, please let me know or call 311 and sign up to volunteer, or visit pittsburghpa.gov/snowangels to volunteer. Likewise, if you are somebody who is in need of a little bit of assistance in keeping your sidewalk clear, you can do all of those same things and request assistance. So just quick plug, since it's been a very snowy day and I think we can expect another tomorrow. So other than that, I will stay on for a little bit, but thank you again to our DOMI presenters, and I hope you all have a good evening.